Hey, everybody. Welcome to In Broad Daylight, a solo podcast hosted by me. I'm Adam Todd Brown. This week, I want to talk about what is sure to become 2024's hottest trend in paranoia, the Chevy Silverado. I will explain, but also how funny would it be if I didn't and just ended the episode there? Very funny. But I won't. Instead, let's travel back a decade to a not at all simpler time in American history. 2014. I am convinced that when the history is all done and written for this hellacious era we're living in right now, we will look back and acknowledge 2014 as one of the worst and most pivotal years of them all. Don't believe me? Well, here's a greatest hits rundown of just some of the events that transpired that year. There was an Ebola virus epidemic. Sure, only one person died in this country over it, but in response, then President Obama came up with a pandemic playbook for future administrations to follow. Not just that, he also appointed a member of the National Security Council to focus on pandemic preparedness full time. And then Trump eliminated that National Security Council position when he took office and failed to even acknowledge that the pandemic playbook existed until months into the COVID pandemic. So I guess that one could have been way more pivotal than it was if, Speaking of that, 538 writer Claire Malone points to 2014 as the start of the Trump era. He wasn't running for president yet, but that was the year when American trust in our institutions hit its lowest point since we started measuring that kind of thing. That means we as a country were especially susceptible to an outside force showing up and promising to tear everything down and start over. And then Obama made fun of Trump at the correspondence dinner, and the rest is history. Also, 2014 is the year Black Lives Matter was founded. And hey, that's not a bad thing, but the reason it started that year sure is. It was in response to the police murders of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Eric Garner in Staten Island, New York, and Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Ohio. And then, in response to Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter was formed, and our Civil War lines were drawn. 2014 is also the year unaccompanied minors started fleeing Central America and crossing the southern border into the United States in droves. More than 68,000 unaccompanied children were apprehended at the border that year, a 77% increase from the year before. Like all things immigration related, that was largely America's fault. In response to that development, Obama asked Congress for money to build a bunch of detention centers, and proving that bipartisanship is possible as long as you're trying to make life terrible for asylum seekers, he got those detention centers. You know those kids in cages we talk about all the time? 2014 is when we started building those cages. If it makes anyone feel better, and I don't know why it would, but things were just kind of becoming a mess globally in 2014, not just in the United States. For example, that's the year the first Scottish independence referendum happened. For some reason, it was not called Skexit at the time, but people have taken to calling it that since because it opened the door for Brexit, the Donald Trump of government initiatives, to happen a couple years later. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, 2014 is the year ISIS started running roughshod over Iraq. I don't remember if anything ever came of that, but I do know that there was a whole bunch of fallout over Russia annexing Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. For one thing, that has since led to a war. Not sure if you know that. But also, that led to sanctions from the Obama administration, which in turn led to Russia maybe, probably, definitely trying to interfere in the 2016 election. It was actually a phone call between Michael Flynn and the Russian ambassador to the United States about those sanctions that kicked off the Russia probe. Slightly less consequential for American life, but harrowing nonetheless. 2014 is also the year Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down by Russian-backed forces, And Malaysia Airlines 370 was eaten by Bigfoot. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Meanwhile, circling back to the United States, 2014 was also the year Gamergate happened. Yay! Back when Trump was campaigning in 2016, Salon.com wrote an article comparing Gamergate tactics to how Trump was running his campaign. And I only bring that up to share this adorable quote that so very perfectly sums up the entirety of the American media's thoughts on Trump at the time. Here goes. Eventually, most witnesses to Gamergate woke up and saw it for what it was. I have no doubt the same will happen with the Trump campaign. Even if many people don't get it right now, history will remember the campaign as a black mark on our democracy forged in bigotry. End quote. And I'm sure at least part of that will turn out to be right, but it won't be the part about Trump supporters waking up and realizing the error of their ways. Oh, also 2014 is the year Flint, Michigan switched their water source to the one that started giving everybody lead poisoning. That's a lot of chaos and trauma for one 12-month period. And that's probably why this last 2014 development didn't get the attention it should have at the time. 2014 was also the year the Wall Street Journal published a huge report about how law enforcement agencies were using devices called IMSI catchers. IMSI meaning International Mobile Subscriber Identity, also called cell site simulators, to intercept the cell phone data of people they were investigating. At the time, the big brand name in the cell site simulator market was Stingray. That's a cool name. It works by masquerading as a cell phone tower and tricking a suspect's phone into connecting with it. From there, snoops can glean all sorts of things, from who owns the phone, to who they're calling or texting, to precisely where that phone is, and in some cases, even the contents of conversations. There are lots of concerning details about these devices, with the biggest being that it's not just suspect phones connecting to these fake towers. Every phone in the area connects to it, and all of that phone data gets collected too. I'm sure someone out there will say, why would you care if you're not doing anything wrong? And hey, shut up. That's not how the Constitution works. The Fourth Amendment says police have to get a warrant to search your stuff. In fact, the first time a Stingray was used to catch a criminal, the government conceded as much in court. But their argument was that it was fine because they had a warrant. Except, as explained by the Electronic Final Frontier, a group that fights the good fight when it comes to digital privacy, the government did not have a warrant to use a Stingray device. An order was issued that said Verizon had to provide the government with whatever information they had that would aid in their search for a guy named Daniel Rigmaiden, who was accused of running a tax fraud scheme. The feds at that point let out a collective, we got this, and instead used that order as justification to run a Stingray search. But also they didn't want anyone to know this device even existed, so they never mentioned it anywhere in their request for assistance from Verizon. The only reason the existence of these things came to light is because Daniel Rigmaiden found out about them while working on his appeal from prison. This led to a bunch of media outlets filing Public Records Act requests, and in 2014, details about the Stingray started coming out, including a bunch of stuff about how hard law enforcement fought to keep the device from becoming public knowledge. And nice try, Fuzz. We know all about them now, and so what? It's not like they stopped using them. Some minor restrictions have been passed in the various locales here and there since then regarding the use of Stingrays, but those devices are still very much in use. In the decades since we first officially learned about them, devices like the Stingray have been used against protesters also, which seems like the most obvious application to me. You got a group of rabble-rousers gathering in the public square who you need to monitor. Pulling up with a Stingray would be an ideal way to start. That's why it's so concerning that even in 2024, we as a society aren't completely sure what police or government agencies own or are using these things. Even worse, like all other technology, Stingray type devices are just getting smaller and smaller, which is the last goddamn thing you want when you're talking about what is already the iPod of mass surveillance. Back in April, an outlet called the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism got their hands on a proposal document from a company called Jacobs Technology. It was part of a winning bid the firm submitted to Massachusetts State Police for a new cell site simulator device. These devices are still enough of a secret that when Electronic Final Frontier reported on this discovery a couple months later, they pointed out it was literally the first look anyone had at modern cell site simulator technology. They go into a bunch of technical details about how it works, and I would love if you'd go read their reporting on it if you want those details. For drama's sake, though, I will mention that this new device is outfitted with direction finding and mobile direction finding devices that are comfortingly known as Trachea 2 and Jugular 2. Eee. The former is capable of tracking a phone's location down to the room of the apartment building or home it's in. And it seems like people still aren't 100% sure how Jugular 2 works. So that's awesome. But the real selling feature of this newest incarnation of cell site simulator technology is its size. Apparently, until now, deploying one of these things meant you needed huge antennas, or if you were going to put it in a vehicle, that vehicle needed to be about cargo van-ish size to accommodate all the hardware on the sly. And nothing says sly like a big-ass cargo van with blacked-out windows parked outside a protest and or in the neighborhood of someone who's under surveillance, which, depending on the neighborhood, could be everybody. But those days are over. You could run and hide from government stingrays when they were all big and bulky, but good luck spotting one when it's tucked inside the sleek and inconspicuous frame of a Chevy Silverado. Did you remember I mentioned those at the beginning of this episode? Well, namaste, listeners. We have successfully circled back to why you should be nervous if you spot a Chevy Silverado in your vicinity, if you think for any reason the government or cops might be interested in you. The proposal submitted to the Massachusetts State Police called for integrating this new cell site simulator system into a regular-ass Chevy Silverado in a way that all necessary wires and antennas are completely hidden. Not just that, but the user interface of the cell site simulator is integrated into the vehicle's navigation system. So not only can you pinpoint the exact location of a suspect's phone, you can drive a truck right the fuck into that phone if you wanna. And hey, I acknowledge that in a lot of neighborhoods, especially the kind where social justice protests are happening, a gigantic Chevy Silverado is still gonna stand out. But if one pulls up to your anti-government activities, I think you should be wary of it. One of the articles I'll link to about this points out that the Massachusetts State Police are definitely not the only outfit driving surveillance Silverados around the streets of America. Also, that they're hiding them in Silverados now means give it a year or two, and they'll be hiding them in Teslas and Priuses and Amazon delivery drones and who knows what else. And that's Amazon once again catching a stray at the end of the episode. Second week in a row. Take that, Jeff Bezos. Hey, if you want even more of me talking alone in front of a microphone, but with less FaceTime, check out the podcast version of this week's episode, wherever the hell podcasts are at, to hear additional stories about a dispute between Las Vegas police and the Las Vegas Raiders over facial recognition, the thrilling conclusion to the Panama Papers scandal, and so much more. And thanks, everybody. I straight up love you.